This testimony is being recorded for the Ombudsman of Pierce County Consumer Complaints. The reason I am recording it rather than typing it is that my motor control has been limited due to onset Parkinson's disease. The reason why I'm making the tape generally is that I have a desire to testify in my own defense against organized crime. Unfortunately, this testimony will have to be abridged. And because it will have to be abridged, it might seem at turns to play into the allegation that it's not complete. A professor in Virginia named Michael Burley, who wrote a new history of the Third Reich that I have read, has a distinctive phrase for issues of comprehensive detail that are abridged. He says, I won't rehearse the details. Now, of course, when he's talking about the German concentration camps, he's referring to diarrhea, dysentery, lice, typhus, the living dead. So when I say I won't rehearse the details, be assured that there are details that I'm not rehearsing. Steve Langer, who went to Princeton University and made my acquaintance at Taylor Alderdice High School in Pittsburgh, once told me I'm not sorry for anything I've done, only that it had to be you. It's important to understand that this driving concept of targeting an innocent person because of something that serves the purpose of those who are poaching overrides their civil rights and their human rights. Another person who lived in that neighborhood, which was a Jewish Holocaust survivor neighborhood, Adam Eisenstadt, who went on to write speeches, ghostwrite for Trumpy Tune, Donald Trump, and had a close friend who was working at Caliban Books, whose proprietor, John Schulman, was placed under arrest for $6 million worth of museum book heists that he profited from. I had been complaining about him for years. In fact, I went to Seattle at the reception of a group called ADWAS, an Abused Deaf Women's Advocacy Service, because his gang ran me out of town with slanders. Yet no one at Sound Mental Health after he was arrested deigned to apologize. Walter White of a group called Tacoma Area Coalition for Individuals with Disabilities suggested that it might help to testify to the Pierce County Ombudsman, despite the fact that I have no confidence that it is not already bandied and decided against me at a house of establishment of that sort. My concern that this is prejudiced, that my appeal is prior prejudice, is because Sound Mental Health made clear that my rights have no impact on their jurisdiction and ideas about me. They withheld my right to go to school for 12 years with slanders and laws. I sat staring into space. I finally escaped to Pittsburgh, where I went to the Community College of Allegheny County, made honors, and graduated despite my near total deafness. Yes, I am nearly totally deaf. Then I came back to Pierce County, nearby Seattle, and attended the Tacoma Community College, where I made Phi Theta Kappa. No mean achievement for a deaf man. So what was it that they were saying in Pittsburgh that seems to be the guiding idea in Seattle that allows them to do something that's so open and shut a case of abuse by peers? Well, Adam Eisenstadt used to say, no one is innocent. In other words, I'm an object to be appraised for value by the state. For Steve Langer, Adam Eisenstadt in Seattle, Washington, it's not so much the reality of my condition because nobody would trade places with me. A deaf man with Parkinson who's been battered, but what my potentials were. This drives them crazy. My potentials were cut down by people in an assassination development. My father was conventional when it came to combating racism. He wrote a book dedicated to Martin Luther King. He was a World War II naval veteran. This book is dedicated to Martin Luther King and to Black advancement in the public schools. Ronald Curry was the sort of protege that Biden was. There were rumors of his belief in himself as a white patriarch, but those kinds of rumors are inevitable when you're in a situation that's called a war for position, by, as they call it, Gramsci calls it. He was the chair of the Foundations of Education Department at the University of Pittsburgh. He was characterized by a woman who was in the Northeast chapter of Amnesty International, who taken classes with him as a hero. So what we're seeing is that when he was killed, on the reverse side of his obituary, there was a scrawl about the German Green Party and injecting parochial values. So my father was probably terminated. This is the way it looks. And they that's what were so good as to leave their mark of Zorro on his obituary, which means that the conventional approach of establishing that black people are equals and arguing for their rights before the law is no good. What we have to do is go to war against symbols like the white patriarch and his child, which meant that when I was attacked blindside, like being shot by a white KKK member named Casper, it was in homage to the black man. This is the absolute truth when it comes to the Seattle Green Party. They believe that. Now, one of the things I want to make clear is that this is abridged. And Seattle has gone so far as to say things in psychiatric papers that I believe I was kidnapped and tortured as a child. I kid you not, they actually said that on paper. All of the evidence shows I was kidnapped and tortured as a child. There's no doubt that I was subject to a horrific Manson ordeal. Yet, the perpetrator group is a lobby of union dimensions that stands firm. He believes he was kidnapped and tortured as a child. And this is considered to them a hallucination, probably caused by listening to this guy, okay, who has, whose drug use had no influence over me. The papers they sent me, they spell my name Jimi, as though I was like born and bred to be raised under the flower child movement. They attacked me when I was 9 or 10 years old. Okay, there was a dragnet program I saw. It was an old police TV show with the ramrod straight. You want to almost say fascist style of police stations in those days. And they had a flower child in possession. And they were moralizing about this pitiful creature who was wandering around with his flower, resisting war. Well, how far does this contempt go is the question I asked. They kidnapped and they gassed me in a place called Kings Estate. My first year doctor was in Auschwitz. He saw Mengele. These are powerful, cruel metaphors to inflict on a 10-year-old. And Seattle doesn't see that. They don't see it as gaslighting. They don't see it as contemptible. They went so far as to poison me in the mouth. When I went camping with Sound Mental Health, when I got back, a huge abscess appeared on my lips. And you can see that my mouth has been poisoned. And that's not supposed to inform my concerns about the development of Parkinson's. Under the school of thought that they're not sorry for anything they did, only that it had to be me. Okay. So we know a little bit more about what it is that concerns me. Now, I've been alone for 30 years. There's no way to rewind and reset my life. The letters that they sent me came from a pornographic corporation called NEVA. They named the people from NEVA. There was no question that it was the NEVA Corporation in Hollywood who put these scripts together. Talks about example instead of example, example. And one of them wrote, the persona is subjected. Let me underline subjected because that always gets deleted when people talk about this. Subjected to successive degradation of the X motive. And I'm not supposed to try to find out what's going on, right? What's this Satyricon that leads to an extermination camp on Mount Desert Island? I'm not supposed to do that. When I get to Pierce County and get dental work done, there was a really helpful woman named Ruth. And then she left, and no more help. I can't get my phone repaired. I can't get an agent from UHC. We're now ruthless. Okay. So I'm not supposed to notice the fact that every friend I had in Pittsburgh, so-called friend I had, apparently knew that Wattenmaker named in the scripts. Get that for a name, Wattenmaker. Boom. My father was on the U.S. Senator Center with George Bush. And a huge factor in the way that my case is prejudiced is a Japanese leader and House Speaker named Sharon Santos. God bless you, Mrs. Santos. But I don't want to know anything but why my rights have been violated so viciously. Okay? And I'm not speculating. It's a pure fact that the NEVA Corporation was a Japanese pornographic company. It's pure fact that they subjected me to successive degradations of the X motive to put me into a concentration camp ward on Mount Desert Island. These are not fancies. And I was poisoned in the mouth by the Green Party representatives of Sound Mental Health for talking about it, and they were acting in defense of John Schulman. So we know what some of these things amount to in terms of the abridgment of my social liberties that have taken place when I tried to create a normal life. They sabotaged it. They knew that Wattenmaker had drilled a neuroplasm implant with a nerve agent into my facial nerve and brain. They all knew it was in there. And they brought in a girl named Rosa. Does that name ring a bell? Because the leader of the Green Party is Rosa Clemente. They brought in a girl named Rosa to kick me in the head psychologically so that it detonated. They were talking about, oh, watch the tea kettle go off. And I went into seizures. And while I was in seizures, having seizures from memories of being kidnapped and tortured as a child, they said, out of pure fantasy from the NEVA Corporation, he is dreaming of raping somebody. This is pure fantasy on their part. And we have a right to go looking in his psyche for proof of this fantasy idea. It came from Martin Andelman, who was involved in a Wells Fargo takeover, who went to Older Dice with Steve Langer and Adam Eisenstadt, this ghostwriter for Donald Trump. And they were using Ming Na Wen from Disney services to play back ideas through neurohypnotic media. I was contacted by an attorney for Yoko Ono named Amanda Harcourt. Sound Mental Health went into a tizzy. They called my mother, Nancy. We need your help to lock up your son. He's having hallucinations about Martin Andelman and Peter Gabriel working together. my mother said, wait a minute. That's not a hallucination. Peter Gabriel wrote to him for 3 years. He used his words on one of his songs. Sound mental health was, oh, curses. Back to the drawing board. Okay, so what they were doing was they were playing neurohypnosis over an impacted and cruel injury. And not one of the teachers, not one of the students in the honors department saw anything wrong with what Rosa was doing. With sentencing me to a lifelong horror of isolation and conditions of poison, and allowing the people who poisoned me to take full control over my hospice destiny, my palliative care in the future, on the assurance, the usual assurance that they mean well to me. Okay, so what is at the root of this appalling gaslighting industry is, um, I mean, if all of this is, if all of this, I was trying to read one of my notes, I can't make it out, but if all of this is incredible, how was it done? Well, the root is that the script was moonshine of a sort. When the 60s happened, a lot of people didn't realize that the Carousel Club was conspiring with Hollywood to produce the Broadway musical Hair. The human traffickers in the KKK already understood methods of enslaving people to sexual charades. So they decided that when they started the war in Vietnam, they were going to also so called liberate the chattel slaves for service as sexual trafficked children. And this was all, decided by the draft board insiders. So Hair was part of what was known as the MK Ultra, which stands for Mein Kampf Ultra Secret, all along. And the script was moonshine. It was a Houdini. It was a Houdini whodunit about John Lennon. It was a moonshine Houdini that they had been working on since World War One. It was a crowd around Ouspensky gang worked with Fripp of King Crimson, who illustrated the program on several of his records, and who was sort of bossing me around, telling me to do this and do that for a long time. I met him in August of 1985. Again, Sound Mental Health pounced on that. My mother said, no, I lent Jim the car. He was invited to West Virginia by Robert Fripp of King Crimson. That's established fact. Sound tried to make it sound like that never happened, but it did. So you have a situation where, you need chronological anthropology. Now, I don't know whether it's harness before the gaslighting industry or sacred proof of my Swami inferiority to point out that the librarian that I plan to praise to the heavens, I was a library clerk. I mean, this doesn't have anything to do, when I say I have potentials, doesn't have to do with my aspirations. Being a library clerk and being in love with Rosa was really nice for me. Um, but I learned the thrill of victory and agony of defeat that comes with working with librarians. And librarian at UW Tacoma, who is a black woman, took 10 years of work, relieved me of a great burden by finding this book for me on remarkably little evidence. It has a whole chapter on Ouspensky's Superman. But one of the things that it clarifies is the importance of chronological anthropology, because Mikhail Laronovi was trying to make himself what Pittsburgh calls play all big. He sort of shuffled the chronology of accomplishments of the Cubists to make himself look more pioneer than he was. But one of the things she finds out is that their theory of the fourth dimension, which got embroidered into cinema by a man named Blaise Sender, which is an adopted name that shows you the moonshine Houdini at work because it means blaze from the cinders, the phoenix, the Houdini, back from the dead thing that they pulled with Casper and Lennon's stepping out double fantasy. Is that they were talking about the fourth dimension, that we were people who were chronologizing it as influenced by Albert Einstein. Well, this Anthony Parton um, investigated and discovered that the chronology was remiss, that they didn't know about Einstein's special theory of relativity yet. So chronological anthropology can be very important in evaluating a case like this one. And you find that it wasn't a discovery of a script, it was an authorship of the script, and then the repossessing of the script by Schulman's gang with Martin Edelman and Robert Fripp for production, super poacher cultural production that Seattle calls the Green Party. I got a card from Courtney Kennedy when they murdered Susie Kennedy, and when I wrote back, they trailed my reply through space and they delivered it with a hush hush call where they could find two more Kennedy bodies. And that's nobody's imagination. That really happened. The Kennedys might not have wanted to get around, but this is Poacher Central.